An introduction to astute leadership. So what is astute leadership? At its heart, astute leadership is the scientist's leadership, a leadership of disciplined reasoning, pressing for analysis and calculation to drive action. This is remarkably different from other forms of leadership, which exert influence through emotional impulse and sentiment. By contrast, the astute leader pulls back the veil of motivation, harnessing the very thing that would undermine many other forms of leadership, namely an individual's ability to control their own emotional impulses through self-awareness and self-restraint. To use astute leadership is to take hold over an individual's self-control. It is a leadership best reserved for intelligent individuals who cannot be otherwise swayed by more emotional means and are willing to submit to logic and reason. Historically, this is an effective leadership where individuals are receptive to its influence, but the larger issue is that it cannot be applied in every circumstance. For the astute influence to take hold, what is logically the correct course of action for the individual must be aligned with the leader's agenda. This is obviously not always the case, and while some degree of reframing can be undergone to correct for this disparity, it may not always be possible to sway individuals in this fashion. Precondition 1 to using astute leadership. An individual who submits to reason. In order to effectively govern using the astute influence, the individual being compelled must be prepared and capable of submitting to reason. Illogical individuals who are incapable of exerting self-control in their own private lives are often poor subjects for the astute influence. These individuals will often be swayed momentarily by logical arguments, but where these reasoned arguments come in conflict with their more emotional impulses, these individuals will often lapse back into old habits. This is the case for addicts, people in love, zealots, and the intolerant. In all cases, these pronounced emotional impulses have the capacity to override the desire to achieve the most sensible and productive course of action through a more rational plan. Precondition 2 to using astute leadership. An understanding of the individual's fundamental drives. A second precondition when using astute leadership is an understanding of the core emotional drive that is compelling the individual to act. Without this understanding, an astute leader will inevitably strive to control the wrong core motivations, greatly detracting from his ability to restrain the relevant influence. The astute leader must keep in mind that what he is trying to accomplish is not compulsion through this drive, but rather a crystallization of self-awareness that will enable the individual to resist counterproductive impulses to produce more successful outcomes. To understand astute leadership completely, there are a number of subjects worthwhile for discussion. With limited time, the focus of this introduction will explore the manner with which a leader can extend scope in order to sway decision. Core to influencing through astute leadership is the construction and implementation of logical arguments. By extending the scope of arguments, an astute leader learns to expand his influence, affecting change by enhancing self-awareness. Extending scope. Now that a discourse has been started, scope will necessarily need to be extended. Invariably, if a person is reasonable and self-controlled, then he is acting in accordance with a logic derived from the way he perceives the situation. It therefore stands to reason that within the framework of his own mind, he has already aligned himself with the most reasonable course of action according to the rules he understands. Hence, a leader must change the rules, extending the scope of the discussion by introducing further variables that the individual has not yet considered. Some examples include time, expanding the scope from one of the immediate future to one of the far future. This is repositioning an argument in the context of time, from one of approaching payouts to one of long-term costs. Perspective, shifting the point of view from one of personal intention to one of perceived intention. This is repositioning an argument to include third-party perspectives, not simply what the individual wants to have happen, but also the manner with which those actions will be perceived by others involved. Causality, expanding the scope from planned results to include unintended consequences. This is exploding the argument to include domino and cascading effects that will take place as a result of planned actions. Complexity. This is the ability to draw the discussion down, out of the clouds by breaking apart simple plans and confronting them with the more challenging, granular problems. This is repositioning an argument into one of unfolding complexity and uncertainty, forcing an individual to acknowledge that they have not yet taken all variables into consideration. Experience. Challenging hypothetical solutions with tangible problems. This is repositioning the argument into one of experience, equating those failed efforts of the past with current intended actions. This is an anecdotal push from a position of knowledge, forcing others to see that their intentions and plans are no more compelling than those failed plans of the past. Within the scope of these expanded arguments, a leader must submit a line of rationale that he believes should logically compel the individual to change the course of his behavior. There is no foolproof trick to winning a logical conversation of this kind, except to say that the arguments must be compelling. Should the arguments be found weak, it is all too possible for an astute leader to further crystallize the negative strategies and intentions of those he is trying to compel. For that reason, the astute leader must always represent himself with well-founded arguments. This necessitates that careful analysis should always be applied before using this manner of influence. For this leadership to not backfire, a leader must win on what is the equal playing field of logic. If he cannot win, then he must avoid at all costs being proven categorically wrong. Society's perception of astute leadership. Within society at large, astute leaders accumulate a great deal of respect. These are the scientists who predict global warming, the fitness experts prescribing diet plans, the individuals who seemingly know what to do based on fact and experience. If only people listened to them, the world would be such a better place. This is what society wants to believe, intuitively, that not enough people listen to the astute leaders, and that if individuals just gave the leaders' words time to resonate, behaviors in society would change. The issue with this is that, for the most part, knowing is not the problem. Society in general knows what it must do, and has given some consideration to altering behavior at one time or another. Very few astute leaders bring forth real revelations in this way. Instead, what the best astute leaders do is crystallize the confidence in the undesirable outcomes should individuals choose to continue in the same behaviors. The problem with this type of leadership is that it is not emotional. While there are some individuals who can alter behaviors based exclusively on rational reasoning, most of the population cannot alter behaviors over a prolonged period based exclusively on logic. Astute leadership does not speak to the baser drives of a human being, and in that way, it often falls prey to more basic human instincts. Without emotion, there is very little meaning to simply knowing what to do. Even as astute leaders reiterate negative consequences, the effect of explaining the undesirable outcome loses potency with each recounting. Therefore, the misconception associated with astute leadership is typically that it should be effective on its own, and that only more awareness is necessary to drive action. This is rarely ever true, and becomes less true when applied on a broader scale or over a longer time frame. Almost invariably under such conditions, where only logic is presented as a reason for control, individuals start falling back into old habits and behaviors. Instead, to be effective, astute leadership almost universally has to be energized by one of the 5 other emotional drives to persist and truly affect change over the long term and on a broader scale. I'm Thomas Campbell, and this has been a short excerpt from the 6 Fundamental Forms of Leadership. If you enjoyed it, please remember to click the like button. That goes a long way to help support and promote the channel. Also, if you've liked learning about leadership and want to stay updated as I continue to release advanced content, don't forget to click that subscribe button. Lastly, if you want to find the complete work, head over to kingscrownsandempires.com or search for the 6 Fundamental Forms of Leadership on Amazon to find both digital and hardback copies. Now I want to turn it over to you. Do you think astute leadership can sustain action on its own? Who do you think uses it best, and what separates them? Share your thoughts and leave a comment letting me know.